Today, I'm going to talk to you about the Foqal Slack bot. It's a Slack bot that's installed on a few of the channels on the Kubernetes Slack instance. So the goals of this thing are to improve user experience and focus contributor time. And what does that actually mean is a lot of times when a user joins the Kubernetes Slack channels, they come in, ask a question, and whether it's because they're asking at 2 a.m. on a Saturday or because the question is too vague or whatever, a lot of times the questions just don't get answered. And sometimes they'll post again, still don't get an answer. And at the same time, contributors a lot of times spend time answering kind of repeat questions. In a study, I found that 30% of the time people feel like they're spending on just repeat questions. And 20% of the time they're spending on answering questions that are already well documented that they don't need to answer. So let me show you how we're solving both of those with a quick demo. So imagine I'm a user, and this is within my kind of test workspace, but imagine I'm a user and I come in and I ask like, hey, how do I run a conformance test? So what happens is when I hit enter, without me having to do anything else, Foqal will use AI to determine that I'm asking a question. It will find the most useful answer, and it will send it back to me directly. So what you'll notice here is, one, I didn't in any way invoke Foqal. I don't even have to know that Foqal. Two, it sends the message directly to me within the channel. So I'm not overpopulating the channel. I'm not spamming the channel with too many messages. So what you'll see is that there's a couple of different answers that are, potentially helpful to me. And what I could do is I can rate these answers, whether they're actually helpful or not. So if I click not helpful, message simply disappears. If I click helpful and I still have a question, then we'll record that feedback. And finally, if you click helpful and answer a question, what we'll do is we'll post the message to the rest of the channel, notifying the channel like, hey, this is already answered. You don't have to worry about answering it again. So basically, this is a very short kind of description of like how a user quickly interacts with Foqal, quickly gets their questions answered. So let's take a look at where these questions are even coming from. So a bunch of questions, 9,500, close to 9,600 questions were actually downloaded from the Kubernetes tagged questions within Stack Overflow. The next section, 17 close to 1,800 questions, were downloaded from Kubernetes docs. Now, what that means is when we are showing somebody one of the sections of docs, we don't want to send them to the entire doc, right? We want to only show them the most relevant section. So what we did was when scraping the Kubernetes docs, we actually divided it into smaller sections so that when we're showing an answer from a doc, we only show a very small relevant section. And the last part of where these things come from is previous Slack conversations. And let me show you how that works. So imagine, and for this, I'll just do the slide demo instead of doing a live demo. So imagine that Michael and Kay are talking. So Michael is asking a question about how to create a Kubernetes pod. Kay responds with some information. Michael's happy, right? So at that point, Foqal not only detects that Michael's asking a question, but it also detects that Kay is helping Michael with a relevant answer. So at that time, Foqal will send a message again, only directly visible to Kay, and ask her to, hey, this is very useful. Can we store this for the future and show it to others? At that point, she can ignore the question. She can edit the question and answer to provide more context, make it more useful, improve it in whatever ways, and finally click store. And when she does that, this question answer pair becomes visible and searchable and is available to others as in the future with similar questions. And Foqal will automatically show that up. So let's take a look at kind of what the results of this so far are. So we've been running a little bit over 3 months on mainly 2 active channels until recently. In the last 2 weeks, 37 of these responses have been automatically marked as something that's helpful to somebody. And a total of 189 times since June has we been marked as something that's helpful. If we look at the breakdown of where these helpful questions come from, Stack Overflow, those questions, even though we actually have the most of those questions, they're only been helpful 10% of the time. The Kubernetes docs, which were actually added fairly recently, but 40% of the useful answers are coming from Kubernetes docs, and close to 50% comes from these previous Slack conversations. So we can see that the most of our value is actually coming from our community itself. And more specifically, we could take a look at like who on the who's providing the most useful answers if this is interesting. So in this case, Hubert Chen added 10 questions, 8 of which were marked useful at least once. And out of these 8 questions, they were marked useful a total of 16 times. And you can kind of get the idea. This guy Bob on the call right now added 11 questions, 4 of which were useful, and those 4 were useful 9 times. So, so what's kind of interesting is what is the most helpful answer? There's actually a tie between the most helpful answers, but I thought this one was a little bit funnier, is that somebody's basically having a problem with deleting something within a pod. And obviously the answer is just to, insert a dash into the command. So what we've been doing recently is talking to the kind of the documentation community, to the docs people, to see how we can work together and then use the kind of responses from Foqal and the feedback loop to improve the docs and kind of like improve the searchability of the docs, maybe provide more examples and just kind of see what we can do in the future. So the other thing that's interesting is people not only like love it, but they actually even expect it to be there. So one person was asking a question, and this user's Scarbeck responded, the Foqal bot probably already responded to you, but here's some additional documentation, or here's some additional context. Or in this case, Edward was asking a question, and finally at the end of this question kind of says, well, hopefully Foqal can help with this. The sad part is that the channel that Edward asked this question on was not already signed up for Foqal, so we were not able to help him because it wasn't installed on his channel. So with that in mind, the short call to action here is invite Foqal on your Kubernetes channel. If you're in the Kubernetes Slack workspace, just do /invite at Foqal. You could do /Foqal and type in something, and it'll show you. There's a bunch of different ways to add a bot to a channel. Talk to me if you don't figure that one out. I'll help you. And we're asking you to invite it to multiple places. So first, invite it to your user-facing channels. When you add it to your user-facing channels, we can do this whole like feedback loop, providing useful answers to people. And at the same time, we're saying you can add it to your like SIG channels, and you can store information such as, or like whatever the most common questions there are, such as, when is the meeting time and where's the YouTube channel and so on. So to add the questions, you'll see that obviously this will pop up, and all we're asking is maybe improve the context a little bit and click store. So make sure to add your useful context and useful answers to Foqal. You can also manually add questions if you like. If you hover over any message in Slack, you'll see the ellipsis button. Click on that, and you'll see add to Foqal, and you'll see a dialogue about like adding what is the question and answer to add. So talk to me about integrations. So what we can do is because if part of your project is in some other different workspace, talk to me and we can figure out how to import that information and kind of like scrape and pull different sources and put that into Foqal so that we can make that available to your users. Talk to me about partitioning. So one thing that we realize is that what time you're meeting for SIG and TribX or something is probably not relevant to the Kubernetes user channel. So what we can do is we can create logical separations of information and kind of finally control how data flows between these, so that a question might only appear within SIG and TribX, or an answer might only appear within SIG and TribX, and a different answer might only appear within Kubernetes user, and we can control how this data flows. And finally, install Foqal everywhere else. If you're already in Kubernetes Slack, you can just install it. It's already installed, so just add it to your channel. If you want to install it to a different kind of open community, let me know. The best way to contact me is either through email, or you can find me on the Kubernetes Slack as just under my name. So if you want to open it, if you want to install it on any open channel, or you can go to foqal.io/OSS. Or obviously, you can install it within any company. What we do there is instead of pulling from things like Stack Overflow and your docs, what we can do is we can pull from Wiki and Jira and all these other things. So this actually is designed to mainly work within a company as well. So with that, I know I kind of ran through this quick. What questions do you have?